watching Let's Chat.
In today's Mixology segment, we are featuring a Smokehead Scotch, courtesy of Quest Brands. Here to tell us a little bit of information. Of course, you know him and love him by now, Mr. David Kidwell. And I like to say the man behind the brand, Mr. Ed Cole, CEO as well. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, so today we're talking about Scotch, and I'm really excited about this. You know, it is a very popular drink, but it's also something a lot of people don't try very often. Tell us a little bit about blended Scotch, single malt Scotch. We've heard these names. What do they mean?
Yeah, it's, again, one of those things that people don't really understand too well. They probably have tried some of these products, but really don't really understand them. Blended Scotch whiskey is where we take a little bit of single malt and we put neutral grain spirit in it. So it's not all Scotch. As compared to single malt comes from one distillery, can only be produced in one distillery, and it comes from pot distillation. It's very specific.
Right.
So the reason for the two of them is because the blended Scotch whiskey, because we put neutral grain spirit in it and stretch the single malt out, it becomes less expensive.
Okay.
Single malts are more expensive.
Perfect. Now, of course, you mentioned that this, is in the whiskey family. I want to talk about bourbon in relation to Scotch.
Yeah.
How are they similar? How are they different?
Well, the difference is single malt Scotch and Scotch whiskey has to be made from barley. It's the only grain that we can use. As compared to bourbon is primarily corn, and that's by U.S. law. So it's really the grains that they use and their distillation techniques.
And of course, that lends into a little bit of a different flavor profile, and we're going to dive into that. Of course, today we're featuring the Smokehead Scotch. Tell me a little bit about this product, and of course, with the name Smokehead, I want to dive into the smokiness.
Yes, it's smoky, and this is a single malt. Where you get that smokiness is how they actually process their barley. So what happens is, to make single malt Scotch, you take barley, you put it in water, and you let the barley soak. The barley starts to grow, it starts to sprout. That's converting starch into sugar. That's what you're looking for, is the fermentable sugar. Well, when they have this wet, soggy barley, they have to drain the water off and dry it. In the case of this particular distillery, they're going to dry it over peat fires. They'll actually dig peat bricks out of the peat bogs in Scotland, let those bricks dry, and they use that for fuel. When the peat burns, it smokes. Smokes your grain, you get your smoky whiskey.
There's maybe a rumor or a belief that Scotch, of course, ages in the bottle, gets better in the bottle. Is that true?
No, unfortunately, once it goes in the bottle, it's done.
We need to drink it now.
You need to consume it now. Everything happens in the wood.
Okay.
So the barrels are really important, and the quality of the barrel is important.
Perfect.
That's going to help create your better single malts. And that's why some of them tend to be a little more expensive. They spent longer in the barrel. That's a big investment on the distiller's part in order to get that extra aging to make them better. But once it goes in the bottle, it's done.
Now, a lot of people, Scotch is known to be enjoyed on the rocks, maybe neat. A lot of people don't think about putting it in a cocktail, and appropriately, we're in Unknown Caller today, kind of the speakeasy vibe that really lends its cocktail list to using a Scotch. David, you've got a great recipe for us, right?
Yes, so what I'm going to make today is kind of a penicillin riff, which was made by a really fancy bartender by the name of Sam Ross up in the early 2000s in New York City. He took what was called the Gold Rush, which was a bourbon cocktail, which was honey and lemon, and he wanted to kind of expand upon that but use single malt whiskey. So he did Scottish whiskey, a ginger syrup with honey, lemon juice. So what I've done is kind of come up with my own variation
David's
of that.
version.
My version, if you will. So I'm using fresh lemon juice. I'm using some bitters from the bitter bottle. Shout out to Kalina for getting these to me today. So we're doing a couple of dashes of her charred dandelion root bitters, which are going to kind of add to the smoky complexity of the whiskey, but also play very well with the sweetness in the ginger liqueur.
Right.
Again, we're showing off the Big O ginger liqueur out of St. Louis. Many thanks to Kathy and Bill for what they do to get this fine product out there for everyone.
And again, I know last time we talked about using the liqueur, I wouldn't think about pairing something that has maybe botanical notes
Sure.
with, a whiskey or a bourbon or now a Scotch.
The idea with this one, with it being predominantly ginger, it kind of lends itself to the traditional recipe that Sam created back in the early 2000s. But what it also does is it kind of tames, if you will, the extreme smokiness of this whiskey, and kind of lends itself to kind of balance it a little bit.
Perfect.
Not saying that it's not a perfectly balanced product as it is, but it just kind of rounds it out a little bit.
So maybe if someone's not necessarily a Scotch drinker
Sure.
yet, this might be something they could try to see if they
Yes.
might want to explore it
Absolutely.
further. A calmer introduction, so to speak. Give it a shake. How popular are cocktails with Scotch in them? Are they getting there? Are they growing?
I think they're there. It just really depends on places that you go, and coming to places like the wonderful Unknown Caller. These guys are some of the best bartenders in this city, and I guarantee you that they can make this cocktail, or if not, come up with their own amazing creation with Smokehead.
Wonderful. And again, Smokehead Scotch is available in stores locally. You know,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
someone's wanting to pick it up and try it, if someone's never tried it, what is the quick flavor profile? If you had to describe it in a few words.
Smoke forward, a little bit of sweetness, some seaweedy earthiness, a little bit of spice with a warm finish.
Do you agree with that, Ed?
It has a nice sweet finish to it.
Nice
Yes.
sweet finish. Wonderful. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks
Yeah,
for
thank you
mixing
for
up
having
this
us.
great cocktail. We will see you again next time.